All right, it's just after 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Cantrell, and I'm the director here at World Trade Center Seattle. You can see the venue behind me. And for those of you who haven't been here and are wondering what exactly is World Trade Center Seattle, we are one of more than 300 World Trade Centers located around the globe in more than 90 countries. The Port of Seattle opened our building about 22 years ago, and it is operated by Seattle-based Columbia Hospitality. And we are a member-based organization. We focus on bringing leaders together, and that's done through both social and educational programs. And right now, during our time of physical distancing, we are doing that safely with virtual programs. So we are thrilled to continue our Can We Talk series. This series started about 3 years ago, and a huge thank you to the Port of Seattle for being our presenting sponsor and making it possible to put on this series. This is where we have open yet intimate conversations around sensitive topics that are so important to discuss in order to create better unity and understanding in the workplace. So right now, I'd like to hand it over to Allison Beeson from the Port of Seattle's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to say a few words. Allison?
Hi, yes, I'm Allison Beeson. I'm with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'm the policy and data analyst with our division. I'm very excited to be here today in partnership with the World Trade Center to sponsor this event. This is very important to the port. As you guys can tell, we built an office that's brand new, around 2 years into the making. And so we've put equity and diversity and inclusion in the forefront. This is a very important topic to us, and I'm excited to present these panelists, but I would like to move it over to my colleague, Jay Dorian, who's our community engagement manager, who can tell you about vital things that are important on our principles and vision for the port when it comes to equity, and he can give you a little bit more details about that.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, everyone. Like Allison said, my name is Jay Doran, and I work with Allison at the Port's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We established this office, again, a little less than 2 years ago, and are the first port authority in the country to create an Office of Equity. And I'd like to say that, you know, when the port created this office, it was to work towards a goal and a vision of creating a port that mirrors the diversity of our community, both through the breadth of our operations and services and within the hierarchy of our leadership and staff. To also develop an organization that instills principles of equity in our culture and ensures a fair and intentional distribution of opportunities and resources to the region and the people that we serve, really to help us better fulfill our public service commitment of expanding economic development and improving quality of life for people in the region. And this topic of collaboration in DEI work and the power of collaboration is so critical. When we look at what we might consider typical cultural norms of a white dominant culture, we all are, I think, accustomed to this idea of individualism and how individuals advance in the success of individuals, and this idea that, you know, we alone are responsible for our success or failure professionally and personally. But you know, an antidote to that and a counter to that, and really at the center of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is this idea of relationships, and how we move from an individual culture to a relational culture. And so that collaboration component is so key in this work. And I'm really glad that y'all are here today to have that conversation, and that you've got an excellent panel to help facilitate our learning and growth in that area. So thank you again, and glad that we can do this.
Thank you so much, Jay and Allison. We appreciate you getting us started here today, and thank you so much for your sponsorship and support of this program. So today, as we've mentioned, we're focused on the power of collaboration in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we are joined by Tara Buchan, Chief Strategy Officer, and Danny Carberry, Chief Engagement Officer at TADA Partners. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So real quickly, in just a few words, what does success look like to you when it comes to DEI? Danny, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I mean, Jay took it away. So I'm just going to add on that. Collaboration is what success looks like in DEI, making sure that everyone is bought in. Now, not everyone at an organization is going to be a DEI expert, but everyone at an organization can be a DEI implementation. And I think that that's so important from leadership to the workforce. So collaboration is what I would say.
Tara, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm in complete agreement with Jay and Danny on this one. Collaboration is absolutely key.
Excellent. Okay, Tara, TADA Partners is relatively new. What made you decide to start your company?
Yeah, community has been a recurring theme for Danny and I for a long time in our careers. We've found that working in sports, we've found that working in media for mission-based organizations, that there's so much that can be accomplished with a sense of community at the focal point, at the heart of your work. So, I think we've all seen a lot that's been revealed in 2020, first with the pandemic, then with the social unrest, the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I think that for us and a lot of the organizations that we partner with, there has come this new renewed interest and hope and enthusiasm really for them to improve their practices, for them to collaborate and work with others. And so for us, we absolutely felt as though having this community of individuals who want to move DEI work forward was incredibly important and necessary. So that's what spurred Danny and I to do this.
Perfect. And then staying with you, Tara, can you give a very high level overview of what exactly your company does for anyone who isn't familiar with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with employers and individuals individuals at organizations come together and we share best practices centered around DEI. We look at that as an entire scope of an employee's whole life cycle. So, we talk about strategy and recruitment and attraction, all the way to when an employee is at your organization. What does onboarding look like? Performance evaluations, all the way to the end. What is it like when an employee leaves your organization? We look at infusing diversity, equity, inclusion into each of those stages. And as we've said, and we'll say multiple times, we collaborate with other organizations in doing that.
Perfect, thank you. So Danny, you have something that's called the Collaborate, and Collaborate is spelled with the number 8. The Collaborate Employer Collective, which is essentially the brainchild of this program. It's when we all started talking about your offerings where we decided this would be the perfect fit for our CAMI Talk series. But can you tell us what exactly is the Collaborate Employer Collective, and why do you think your approach can be successful for a business that is hoping to incorporate DEI and belonging?
Yeah, so Collaborate Employer Collective is a cohort of employer organizations. And when I say employer organizations, I really mean it. We believe that if you employ individuals, you can be part of our organization. We have members that have, hundreds of thousands of employees to members who have 16 employees. And so the group gets together, virtually for now. As you said at the start of this, we love in-person events, but we're maintaining physical distancing right now. But we get together and we learn and share from each other. We share data, we share best practices. And one of the things that is the most, I think, light bulb moments at any one of our events is when we share missteps, things we would have done differently if we could do them all over again. But that's really when the learning happens, when other organizations are saying, hey, we made this mistake in our organization. It cost us time, it cost us money, and it cost us employee engagement. Take our work, don't do what we did, but, you can have the product of our work and you can move forward in a more quick fashion. One of the things we love about the individuals who practice diversity, equity, and inclusion is, unlike some other jobs, you don't just want to hold this work to your chest and say, I'm only doing this work for my company and I don't want anyone else to know our trade secrets. This is an industry where, you know, if you're moving the needle forward in your organization, you tend to want to pay it forward. You tend to want to share that because, you know, individuals who do DEI really are trying to make the workplace better for everyone. So Collaborate Employer Collective is an opportunity to do that work together.
Okay, excellent. And Danny, you know, some people believe if you create an equitable and inclusive environment, then diversity will naturally come. What are some of the key metrics that companies should be looking at if they really are striving for this kind of work environment?
Well, you know, believe it or not, Emily, you know, what you just said about creating an inclusive culture or creating a culture of belonging is actually a relatively new way of thinking. In the past, a lot of organizations felt that if they hire based on diversity metrics, then they could fit their employees into the culture that has already been created at their organization. And organizations, you know, through trial and error, through doing this work and investing in this work and really, you know, caring about the humans that work at their organizations are really turning the corner on this and believing what you just said, that the first thing to do is create a culture of belonging at an organization, and then, you know, work on the rest. But you know, the metrics I would say that you could look at is having leadership bought in to your DEI work. So making sure that they're bought in, that they either have goals or even compensation connected to DEI metrics. The second thing I would say is that you have managers trained to hire a diverse workforce and to hire a flexible workforce. You know, a lot of times organizations will have DEI goals and initiatives, but the step isn't taken to then train the managers that are managing these human beings in the organization. And so to make sure that the managers are trained and feeling comfortable with all the DEI initiatives as well, is the next step. And then I would say the third step would be having long-term DEI plans. So not just having, we're increasing our diverse hiring metrics and then, you know, it'll be all fixed, but actually having a long-term DEI plan. And that's what we focus on in Collaborate Employer Collective, is starting with strategy before you even hire someone, moving into, you know, hiring and recruitment, all the way through an employee's exit. What are the ways you infuse DEI into every step of an employee's life cycle?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Danny. So Tara, you know, talking about strategy, some of your early 8 stages include strategy, attraction, and recruitment. So if a company is wanting to look at its DEI strategy and take actionable steps to attract and recruit talent in a truly authentic way, you know, we're not talking, let's just check a box. What do you recommend?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Emily. I want to share a story about an organization that Danny and I have worked with for several years. You know, they decided, and it was in a very commendable way, that they wanted to fix some of their pay equity gaps. And so they spent a lot of time and effort and energy and money doing so. And when they announced that to their employees, it wasn't very well received. And that sounds strange, I know, because, you know, pay is absolutely one way of showing equity and for an individual. But the problem is that this organization never asked their employees what they were most interested in. They didn't talk to their employees. So, you know, any kind of strategy, DEI strategy, and I think strategy for your entire company is listen to your employees, ask your employees. A lot of these, in this particular case, a lot of the employees at that company, they wanted to see a pathway towards leadership. They wanted to see themselves represented in leadership. They, of course, were happy about the pay corrections, but they really wanted to see that they could see themselves represented in leadership. And so, you know, it's kind of just it's an interesting moment for a company when they, instead of making decisions about what they're going to fix, that they really start first with asking their employees what is the most important thing to them. As far as attracting diverse talent from underrepresented groups in particular, I think an organization needs to really think about why they want to do that and who they're partnering with. If you start with that foundational question, I think it can answer a lot of questions for you, and it can also point you in the right direction as to who you'd like to partner with. And then just lastly, you know, we're going to say it over and over again. It's buzzwords like collaborate today, but when you are attracting diverse talent, please also think about the fact that once you have diverse talent in your workforce, that you are infusing DEI throughout the entire life cycle. It's one thing to be an organization that is really good at attracting and doing that work externally, but if you are not doing the same work internally and there's a gap there, that's going to be incredibly obvious to your workforce. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is this all comes down to communication, and then also building trust and an environment where people can have these open conversations. And so nothing comes as a surprise. Even though it's a good surprise, you still want to avoid the surprises.
Yeah.
So real quickly to our attendees, if you have any questions as we are talking, please go ahead and you can either use the Q&A function or put them in chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll spend the last part of this program answering any questions that you have. But moving on to a couple of the later phases, so hiring and onboarding, those are some of the earliest opportunities to create inclusion. Do you have some examples that companies have shared of lessons that they've learned or success found in these stages? And Danny, you also mentioned missteps, so anything that these companies would recommend avoiding in the future?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that if that's okay, Danny. There's one particular organization that we worked with that, you know, really had to do some self-reflecting. They were scaling and growing at an incredibly fast rate. And so they thought for the hiring and process specifically that encouraging employees to kind of hire their friends was a way that they could shortcut some things. You know, oh, we've worked with this individual, we know them, it's great, we can kind of skip some of those normal hiring processes. You know, what they found when they did that is that they ultimately were becoming a company where it was a room full of the same individuals with a lot of very similar experiences. They were definitely looking at it more as a culture fit rather than a culture add. Countless studies and reports and data show us that diverse teams produce better results. So, you know, when this company really recognized this was a pain point for them, they completely changed what their hiring process was like and how that was performed. And I would also say that, you know, from the onboarding side of it, ensuring that when someone starts at your organization, they completely understand what your DEI focus and strategy is incredibly important. Communication there is really important. You know, DEI does not just sit in one department. If an organization is really invested in it, it goes across the board at your organization, and every individual at your company should know where you stand, should know what your strategy is and how you're aiming to get there. So that is a huge part of onboarding that I think is really important. And then we've seen a lot of companies have a huge amount of success in creating belonging with their employee resource groups. It's just it's an opportunity to feel as though you can hear how others at your company are feeling and what their experiences are like. Either it pulls something out of you personally that, oh, I can relate to that moment, or it shows you, you know, someone else's experience might be incredibly different from yours, which again, you're not going to get if you're not communicating.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And something that you said, it actually brought back a memory from one of our earlier Can We Talk programs. I believe it was last year, but Kim Vu was one of our panelists. She was with Bank of America at the time, and now she's with Remitly. And during the Q&A session, one of the leaders in the room had asked her, what can I do today to start creating more of a diverse workforce? And because they understand that there is power in diverse thinking. And she said, think about a Friday night at home. This is pre-COVID times, of course, but who's sitting around your dinner table? If you were to invite people over 8 p.m. on a Friday night for dinner, who are they? Do they look like you? Do they act like you? Do they think like you? And if they do, then there's your problem. So think about who you want to have at your dinner table. And that just resonated with me.
I love that.
Danny, what are some ways an organization can help develop its employees and put individuals, particularly those from the underrepresented groups, on a path toward leadership in an equitable way?
Yeah, so I think there are three major ways. I'll kind of quickly go over the first two because Tara touched on them. But as I mentioned earlier, creating and fostering a sense of belonging, I'm going to assume you already did that. Number two, creating employee resource groups. I think if you're on this call and your organization doesn't have an employee resource group, a business resource group where they discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, different types of representation, then I think it's time to kind of reflect and sit and begin setting those up. And then I think, as you said, number three, as Tara mentioned, those kind of opportunities to see yourself reflected are so important. And we worked with an organization who they were noticing that at a very senior leadership level, those from underrepresented groups were dropping off. We're not putting themselves up to be considered for hiring positions. And they, commendably, they did a deep dive on that data. Their first assumption was that they weren't hiring those individuals, and they found out that those individuals, a lot of them were women, were self-selecting out of that process. And they wanted to know why. And so what they did was they created a mentorship program in their organization. But one of the things we thought was really exciting is that they had multiple offices, and you could create ways to make this work in your organization if you don't, but they had multiple offices around the country. So they paired mentors with mentees in completely different offices so that the mentors could get out of the mentees, why are you not, selecting yourself to be moved up into a senior leadership position? And what they were finding was that they did not see themselves reflected in leadership. And so this is science. Their brain told them, I don't see myself reflected. I cannot be that. And so that was number one. And then number two was they also saw that the individuals that were in executive leadership did not have a work-life balance situation. They themselves did want to have that in their lives, eventually. These are people who are, they could have been young people who weren't married, they didn't have a family, but they wanted that for themselves. And they saw that if you wanted to be an executive leader, that was not possible for you. So they were self-selecting out of that. So in their mentorship program, they really focused on, first of all, having the leaders in the company be louder about having a family or having work-life balance or not acting like you live and breathe the company and you have nothing else, that you can do. And, gleaning that information out of these individuals who really could make their company better and more diverse and have better business outcomes was a huge win from this organization. And they did it by creating a mentorship program.
What a great idea. Do you have any suggestions to anyone who's tuning in right now who's wondering, how do I go about creating a mentorship program, especially if they don't have offices across the country to work with on it?
Yeah, I think the first step is to, talk to the executive leadership. There are steps that they can take that were the result of the mentorship program I talked about, which is, we talk about it in a way, we call it parent loudly. Be loud about the fact that you have obligations outside of your workplace. If you're a parent, if you're a caregiver, if you just have a life outside of work, be loud about that and talk about that, because people are watching. And then there are ways to pair people up. There's technology that you can use, and I encourage everyone to look up different pieces of technology that pair people based on data. But if you want to do that yourself, I would encourage pairing people not within the same department, or kind of as far away from each other as possible, so that you have that level of being able to be open and honest without your answers being reflected in any type of job performance.
Perfect. So Danny, I have another question for you, but Tara, please feel free to jump in at any time, interrupt. Do you have anything that you want to add to what Danny just said?
No, I also feel as though some of the companies that we work with that have been able to utilize some of that technology, they have felt as though that investment was incredible for them, that they were able to really tie specific metrics to what they wanted to achieve in mentorship programs.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. So Danny, another question for you. How can a company start to assess its performance evaluation process to ensure it has alignment to their DEI goals? And are those two things connected?
Yeah, this is an important question, because Tara and I have done a lot of work in pay equity as well. And this is the second and important area where wage gaps can widen based on gender or racial wage gaps. Because a lot of times performance evaluations are where bonuses and raises are tied to that. And so I think, one of the things that we can do first is make sure that the metrics that we're evaluating employees on are uniform. Studies show, and many people on this call probably already know, that women tend to be evaluated on their style, and men tend to be evaluated on their actual performance metrics. So making sure that whenever someone is being evaluated, it's uniform across the board. That gets into my earlier point about training managers. So this is such an important step in DEI, is making sure managers understand DEI principles, so that they can more easily and more organically do that uniform evaluation process. And then getting a diverse group of evaluators together, maybe from different business groups that have different experiences with these employees, so that you have multiple opinions on performance evaluation. And then I think that's something that is, some people try to kind of shy away from, but I think don't be afraid to evaluate the evaluation. What organizations are seeing when they look at data is that they can say, we have a huge wage gap problem in our organization, or we have a huge promotion, a leaky pipeline problem in our organization. And when they really look at the data, they might be able to pinpoint a particular business group that is, maybe not, that is kind of exacerbating wage gaps, or that is kind of evaluating people in a certain way. And so if you're willing and able to look at the data of your performance evaluations, you might be able to see some trends. And don't be afraid to look into that data and then have that data be able to tell you a story.
Okay, great. So I do have a couple more questions for you, but one question that we received from Anika is pretty timely with what you were just talking about. So Anika said that she's currently working on revisions and improvements to her organization's employee recognition program. She says, in my research, I found many correlations between DEI and recognition, such as increased employee engagement, innovation, a sense of belonging, feeling valued. How do you recommend collaborating to emphasize the importance of DEI and employee recognition across the organization? So would either one of you like to take that question?
I mean, I think that this is, I'll allow Tara obviously to answer as well, but I think this is baked into your DEI principles. As we know that, if your managers are trained on managing a diverse and flexible workforce, they will understand how to do this. And I do agree that during performance evaluations, employee engagement surveys and employee engagement questions are, of the utmost importance, because any part of a kind of successful DEI strategy is constant speaking to the workforce, constantly making sure that your employees are bought in and that they're giving you feedback on your DEI strategies. As Tara mentioned earlier, one of the biggest mistakes and one of the most common mistakes that's made in a DEI strategy is that the employees aren't engaged, that all of the work is done, with a small group, and then it's rolled out to the employees, and then it's a big shock when the employees, have a different reaction than they were hoping for. So continuous employee engagement, I totally agree with.
I would just add, no ambiguity. If leadership is saying this is what is important and this is why it's important to us, and here's what the expectation is, in order for us to achieve our company DEI goals, if that's set and clear from the beginning, it just provides a level of clarity for individuals as to what their role is in progressing the work. So being very clear with that, I think, is incredibly important.
So not just communication, but clear communication.
Yeah.
All right, so we're moving along in the employee's life cycle now. Tara, can you give an example from an organization who really chose to look at the employee exit interview? We know these are pretty tricky sometimes, but a company that did these interviews and used the information in a productive way when it comes to DEI.
Yes. One company that we worked with, thanks for the question, Emily. One company that we specifically worked with, they really dove in.
This is what happens when you have virtual programs.
I can hop in if you need me to.
Oh,
is that I'm back, right?
You're back.
Oh, 2020. 2020. Apologies. Yeah. So this particular company that we've worked with, they noticed overwhelmingly so a trend. They saw that one specific group was consistently being hired and then not staying at their organization. And so, numbers and data can show us one thing, but really at the heart of it is always a story, right? There's always an individual behind those numbers. And so this company decided to extensively interview individuals after they had left and to continue to keep asking them questions. And when they explained why they were doing that they wanted for this number to change, that they wanted for there to be less individuals of this particular group leaving, people were very willing to help because they had maybe experiences at that organization that they did not feel like they were on the inside. They definitely felt like outsiders, and they didn't want for that to be the experience of other people at the company. And so it's asking a lot of questions. I think when someone leaves, it's an interesting time. Like, you might feel more that you can be more candid with what your experience was. And of course, everybody's different, but I know for me, there's been plenty of times where I've left an organization and I really do wish I could have shared a little bit more so that maybe individuals who are there currently wouldn't have to go through some of those same experiences. It's asking those questions. I think that when you're being asked those questions and when you're given a platform to provide answers and share your experience, good comes out of that.
Great, thank you. So I have one more question for you, and then we'll get to the other questions that we have from the audience. And if anyone else has any other questions, just a reminder to please put them in either the chat or the Q&A function here in Zoom. But I'm going to put one of you on the spot. You can choose which one. So one of you, can you please break down the 8 stages of an employee's life cycle before we wrap up this portion of the program, just so everyone on this call is clear?
Yeah, do you want that? Or I can do that if you want.
Go for it. Go for it, Danny.
Okay, Tara, tell me if I got this right. Okay, so we have strategy. It's so important that before thanks. I already got it. before you do any work, you lay out a long-term DEI strategy, as we mentioned before. That includes having everyone bought in, having leadership tied to your goals, having managers trained, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's recruiting, hiring. That process, sometimes goes hand in hand, but those are actions that you take that are separate. Then we have onboarding employees. This is where employees within the first 90 days can either feel like they belong at your organization, or they can feel that it's not the right fit. A recent study said that employees answered, I feel like I belong here, 97% of the time when they were asked, what makes you stay at your organization? Then we have performance evaluations and tying rewards to those performance evaluations. That's another part of ensuring that your employees stay and that they're moved up into senior leadership positions. And learning and development. One of the things that's super important is who gets learning and development opportunities. Who gets those opportunities, and are they equitably distributed? Because a lot of times we find that like groups can provide each other with training, with opportunities to develop their skills. And if we're not looking at that in a really streamlined fashion, we might miss some individuals. And then we talk about employee exits and all of the information that you can glean from those exits. As Tara mentioned, we work with an organization who is willing to share that, they were kind of shocked to find out that there was a particular manager that was not equitable and was not following DEI principles. And when they looked into it further, they actually had, 5 or 6 instances in their employee exit interviews that were so clear and clearly shared this information. And so, that organization did employee exit interviews as a formality, but didn't look at the data and didn't do anything with that information. And if they had infused that information back into strategy, they really would have had a different outcome. So I think I got 8, but if I didn't, I'm sorry.
Sarah, how did Danny do?
She did great. I think that we mentioned it for sure with recruitment, but attract as well. How are you looking at, not only who you're partnering with in outside organizations, but what is the sense that people get from your company, and how much of a gap is that with how your company actually is?
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for letting me put you on the spot. So a question for both of you, and then we will go to audience questions. If someone attending today is just so inspired and wants to make an immediate change, what is one thing you would recommend for a first step?
I would say leadership buy-in. Get your leaders connected to this work. Get them in front of this work. They do not have to become experts in DEI, but they need to be connected to the work.
What if you are the leader? What if you are at the top of your organization?
Oh, I can answer that. Talk to your employees. Yeah. I mean, it's at the heart of everything. Your company is what your employees say it is. You can have a vision and a strategy and all of that, but at the end of the day, their experience is what your company is. And so I would say to leadership for sure, it's talking to your employees. That communication is so incredibly important.
Right. So keep that dialogue going. Excellent. So we have a question from Brian, and Brian said that often companies are focused on the recruiting and onboarding side of things for DE&I. Where are you seeing pitfalls later than that in the employee life cycle, and how are you seeing companies building systems or processes to avoid them?
Yeah, I think we can both answer that one. I think that, as we mentioned earlier, companies not creating and fostering that sense of belonging prior to recruiting and hiring. Old school methods are having diverse hiring metrics, but expecting the employees to fit into the box you place them in, and not being willing to, as Tara mentioned earlier, have a culture add everybody who you add at your organization doesn't have to fit the current culture at your organization. You're hoping for diverse perspectives. You're hoping to change the culture at your organization. You're hoping to continue to learn. And then another key place where that pipeline is a bit leaky is the performance evaluation, because that is where senior leadership positions are offered. That's where bonuses and raises are offered. And when we are not applying metrics to performance evaluations and uniformity to performance evaluations, we allow some managers to evaluate based on their feelings, evaluate based on style, and that doesn't always give us the best outcome.
Yeah, I would just add again, something that we've said is that information that you receive when an individual leaves your company, it's sort of a peek into what their experience was like. And to us, it's gold. It's like you have such an opportunity at that point to see maybe what went wrong or what you could have done differently. And so I think it's information that should be consistently looked at, what someone's experience was like there while they were there.
Thank you both. Tanisha is asking, what have been the most effective ways to train managers to adopt DEI practices?
Creating employee resource groups and business resource groups is not just for the individuals who fit into those employee resource groups. Having allies be part of employee resource groups broadens perspectives of managers. As you talked about what Kim Vu said, if you have all of the same type of people doing the evaluating, you're not going to get the right metrics that you're looking for. And so making sure that our managers are involved and are executive sponsors of employee resource groups gives them new perspectives. It gives them learning opportunities. I would say also data is important. And a lot of times when we're training our managers, we're talking about data. We only have a certain percentage of this. Our wage gap is this percent. But they're not telling stories. And stories are so important to human beings. So instead of just presenting metrics to managers, really telling stories and opening up their eyes to different perspectives.
So thank you for that. COVID is seen as an equalizer when it comes to DEI. The fact that people don't have to move to a big city to have a job at Microsoft or Amazon. There's more flexibility in working remotely. That's just one example. But at the same time, it seems like with people working remotely, it's that much more difficult to implement some of these things that you're talking about. So do you have any recommendations for people who are trying to maybe start from scratch with DEI practices in their organization? How do you do that virtually?
Yeah, I mean, we've been fortunate enough to work for a lot of organizations that have been remote for a very long time. And so, this is sort of the power of what we feel like this community and group is that we have, where when COVID hit and all of these companies that thought they would never be remote, now we're becoming remote, we were really able to pair them up with organizations that have been doing this for a really long time and have found success in doing that work virtually. I think, again, something that we'll always focus on, and it's great advice that we got from an individual quite recently, is the why is so important. Why is it that this is important to your organization? That to me is, where you start with a moment of just being really authentic. It's not a trend, right? It's not just because of everything that was exposed and revealed with this year and this pandemic and the social unrest of this year. I think it really is focusing on why is it that you want your organization to do this work.
Thank you, Tara. And if an organization doesn't have a budget at this time, let's say they're hit really hard by COVID, or this is new for some organizations, but we know it's a 365-day-a-year effort, where can they start where they're not having to pull money out of their pocket? Is there anything that they can do that doesn't, cost anything right now?
I think that the employee resource group and business resource group is one way. That being said, I do highly recommend that you give your ERGs and BRGs a budget eventually, because they're doing great work. And a lot of times they're doing work that is volunteer based. That's not part of their job description, but they feel passionate about running that group. And so I highly recommend that there is compensation or a budget involved eventually, but at least setting up a DEI committee within your organization, finding who feels really passionate about this work. And again, if you're a leader and you wanna do this work, joining that group yourself, listening to your employees, what are they saying? That's the one way to get started.
Great. And then one more question, and then we might be able to set everyone free a few minutes early before next meeting, because everyone has a meeting right after this. But you talked about partnerships and really evaluating, like, who are you partnering with? Do you have any recommendations for who organizations should be looking at partnering with, or any examples for that?
I mean, the one comment that I'll make is that learning from others that have a different perspective than you do is so incredibly important. I think that that's been an overwhelming theme on this conversation. So, if you're a large company, talk with a small company. If you are in the tech industry, talk with, public entity. That's where we've really seen these light bulb moments of figuring out ways to partner. It relates so well to what we're trying to do with diversity in general. Like, you want to learn and hear from others that are going to look at this in a different way than you have. So I would say just seek out things that are different than what you're currently doing.
And I would say don't make assumptions. We see more often than not in our groups that someone will say, well, I'm sure you're all doing this, but I just wanted to share that we're using this technology. If you have a question and you want to improve your workplace, don't make assumptions that everyone's doing that thing. Ask the question or share what you're doing, because more often than not, companies aren't doing that, and they really can learn from what you're willing to share.
Excellent. So I think what we've learned today is communication, and make sure it's clear, not ambiguous. Start with a strategy, evaluate who you're partnering with. We learned about the importance of employee resource groups and mentorship programs, and don't be afraid to evaluate the evaluation. Love that. Well, with that, Tara Buchan and Danny Carberry, thank you so much for being here today and representing TADA Partners. Thank you for all that you do in the DEI arena, and a big thank you again to the Port of Seattle for sponsoring this program and for making this series possible. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll be working on the 2021 schedule, and we'll be releasing that shortly. And so with that being said, we'll set you all free 10 minutes early. That's our holiday gift to you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for having us.